Welcome and thank you all for joining us today. I am Jeremy Thorne with Avantis Investors, and this is the Behavioral Divide, where we bring together both academic research and real-world financial advice to uncover insights that can help us make better financial decisions. Today, we're going to be talking about financial legacy decisions, and we're going to have an interview hosted by our good friend, Professor Hal Hershfield. He's going to talk to two fantastic guests. On the academic side, it's going to be Professor Wade-Benzoni from Duke University. Kim's an expert in intergenerational decision-making. We're also going to talk with Matt Hall, who's the CEO and co-founder of Hill Investment Group. He's got a lot of experience in the financial advice industry. So excited to have perspectives from both of these two sides. Hal's going to lead us through that conversation. So really excited about that. Hope you enjoy the program. We'll go ahead and send it over to Hal.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Man, I am excited for this next episode. This is episode 7. We spent a lot of time thinking about this next block of episodes. Now, we're doing something a little bit different. It used to be that we'd talk to different, an advisor and an academic, and then I'd kind of bring some insights together. Here, we're changing things up, and we've got, single conversations with both an advisor and an academic. On today's episode, we're talking about legacy decision-making, legacy motives and legacy decision-makings. We've got two great guests. We've got Kimberly Wade-Benzoni. She's a professor at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. She's a professor of management organizations there, as well as the Center of Leadership and Ethics scholar at the business school there. And she's really spent her whole career studying what academics call intergenerational decision-making and legacy motives. And then on the advisor side, we've got Matt Hall. He is the co-founder and CEO of the Hill Investment Group. And he's a really a veteran in the industry. He's got a lot of experience talking to clients. And so, here's a couple of things that I took as takeaways I think are going to be really interesting to pay attention to. First off, legacy decision-making, not all that organic. It's not the type of thing that people just happen to think about. One of the things that Matt said was that you've really got to prompt people to come up with these decisions, or they have something that prompts them. And you want to not have these decisions rushed because of some external event. One of the other takeaways is that, Kim's research really shows is that you can actually get people to think about these things. You can get them to think about legacies. She's got a task that we're going to make available to anyone listening that gets people to sort of gently reflect on what matters to them and what they will want to have as their legacy. And I think one of the big points that she highlights is that there's no judgment here. There's no angle. It's not trying to get people to donate all their money to charity or keep it all for their kids, but rather to get people to make intentional decisions around their money, especially with regards to how it's going to be spent and given after we go. All right, I think I'm ready to jump right in. Let's jump into the episode. Matt and Kim, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited for this conversation. This is a topic I'm really interested in, this idea of legacy decisions, right? So much of the academic work has been on thinking about how people, accumulate assets and think about, getting to the point of retirement. But today we're really talking about something that goes far beyond that, like thinking about the afterlife, if you will. I don't mean that in some sort of paranormal way, of course, but thinking about legacy and what happens after we're gone. And so Kim, I'm going to start with you. You have been, and I'm not trying to, to be, like a kiss up here, but you've been an inspiration to me. You've done this incredible work over your whole career on legacy decisions and intergenerational decision-making across so many domains, right? Environmental decisions and more recently, some financial ones, although I know you're really done so much on the sort of theory side of legacy. And so maybe just to level set here, can you just talk a little bit about what you and other researchers mean by a legacy motive? Let's start there.
Sure. My co-authors and I have been working on a series of research projects that look at the role of legacy motivation in decisions that involve multiple generations. And legacy motivations are rooted in the desire to feel that one's life has meaning. And the legacy itself functions as a carrier of that meaning, extending the self into the future through impacts on future others. We define legacy as an enduring impact attached to one's identity that persists after one has left the context in which the lasting effect was created. And legacy motivations are the driving force behind the behaviors and decisions that lead to the intentional creation of legacies. So, more simply put, legacy motivations are the desire to create a legacy.
Okay. Let me just think about this for a second here. Maybe I'm gonna just switch over to Matt for a minute here because I'm sure you've seen these sorts of considerations pop up in your practice. Can you talk to me a little bit about like what happens when do you see clients consider these sorts of these trade-offs? Kim talking about like thinking about when we extend, beyond our own life. When does that pop up in your conversations with clients?
Yeah, unfortunately, Hal, it doesn't. I mean, it doesn't unless it's pushed,
Okay.
unless there's a structure for it. I would say it's not surprising to me that most of the clients, even highly successful clients we work with, they've spent their lives doing the things that they thought they were supposed to do to be successful.
Right.
And
Right.
considering what comes next or what they want their family to remember or how they want their resources to be used, um, it just doesn't happen as often as we might hope. So I think that's a big opportunity for our profession, is to create more opportunities to just have these discussions, to be mindful, thoughtful, and hopefully intentional about what we choose to think of when we think of legacy.
Gotcha. So I mean, and we'll come back to this because I think there's something interesting there that, it's not necessarily something that happens organically. And Kim, maybe I'll ask you to speak to that. I've got some other questions for you, but on what Matt just brought up makes me think like, how often do people just naturally think about legacy? Or is this the thing, I don't know if you found in your research that it has to be prompted by some sort of other source. Is that something you've seen or thought about?
So, Hal, you may know there is a literature in psychology called generativity
Okay.
that looks at how, as people approach the end of their life, they start to think about what has given their life meaning, and they start to craft a narrative or a story, kind of in hindsight, to make sense of their story and to articulate a legacy that's already happened. However, my co-authors and I, my research team and I, we have tried to come up with ways. We believe that if you can take that process and make legacy reflection more intentional early in life, as early as possible, or at any time, really, in any context, then you have the opportunity to then create your legacy story rather than trying to just tell a narrative in hindsight. So that's
Yeah.
what we've been working on. We've been working on ways to get people to intentionally reflect on their legacy, and to then it helps them to better then make decisions and behaviors that will allow them to craft a life story that matches with their vision.
This feels like the difference between studying in advance and then cramming for the test right before it happens, right? And the test here is the end of one's life, right? So so Kim, let me ask you this. A lot of your writing talks about intergenerational decision making, right? And one of the things that I think you do a great job of acknowledging, and Matt, I'll be curious where you land on this as well, is that it's hard enough for people to think deeply and to save, if you will, for their own futures, let alone for the futures of other people we don't even know. Sometimes it's our own ancestors, but sometimes it's, society at large. Um, so I think it's not crazy where you could imagine a scenario where people just want to sort of spend now and die with zero. And I'm not, I'm glossing over this, but I know there's of course a whole die with zero movement. This is admittedly a loaded question, especially for you, Kim, who studied intergenerational decision making. But do you think there's any wisdom in doing so? Like, why might it be the case that somebody might want to essentially draw down so that things are complete, the accounts are closed when they reach the end of their life? Or is there not so much wisdom in that? And again, loaded question. Answer as you will.
In response, I would ask what they're spending it on and why they're dying with zero. I don't think this is what you had in mind, but one reason people can die with less or zero is because they gave it away trying to help other people or to improve society, such as Warren Buffett pledging to give away most of his fortune to foundations by the end of his life, and the phenomenon that we may be talking about in a few minutes that my research team and I call the Andrew Carnegie effect. It's because that being in addition to being known as one of the richest Americans in history, he was known for his philanthropy and his strong belief that the rich should use their wealth to improve society. So, in the case where you die with zero because you've given it away to try to help others, that contributes to legacy building. It's a lot harder to build a positive legacy your by only acting in your own self-interest for yourself. And people care about their legacies. Our work doesn't try to nudge people in one direction or the other. We just give people the space to think about how they want to be remembered by others and to act on those thoughts. And what we find is that when we have the opportunity to reflect on our lasting impact, one that extends beyond our physical existence, people's decisions and behaviors shift in a way that is more other oriented and more future oriented. So legacy motivations help to counteract that tendency for short term and self focused behavior.
Okay, so Matt, here's the elephant in the room. Are we going to jump in there, Matt? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm chomping at the bit here, Hal.
Yeah, go for it.
I think on the die with zero idea, you know, I think you've talked about it on this podcast before, this notion of giving with a warm hand.
Right,
Instead of
exactly.
giving
Love that
with
phrase.
a cold hand.
Yep.
If you think about why that's sort of a novel phrase or why that seems to stick with people is because so many of us have believed that what they give happens after we're gone.
Right.
And so, and that's just some sort of like societal norm.
Yeah.
So if I make a decision to start giving while I'm alive, what does that mean? How do I do it? No one modeled that for me, likely. So how do I start to talk about this while I'm here in a way that I haven't seen successfully done either to me, for me, or around me? It's not what my neighbors do or what I think my neighbors do. Is this weird? And I think that's part of what is the challenge here, which is getting at one's own real preferences. What are my real preferences about not just what the quantity of what I give, but about the values and the meaning of what I give? It's really hard. That's hard work. That takes a lot of reflection. And I honestly think there's room for some coaching there. So the die with zero thing, I've had people bring it up and they laugh about it like, oh, I would never do that. But I think what's interesting about it is what if you did die with zero, but you had fulfilled all of your legacy ideals prior to your passing?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a different way to frame it and a different way to look at it.
I think that's a great way to think about it. And I mean, like you said, that requires so much reflection and intention too. I mean, I know, there's a professor at Harvard Business School, Ashley Willens, and she always talks about the big why, and that's, this question of like, what drives you? What's the big thing that drives you? And it's, it's so funny because it's such a simple question. It's 3 words, the big why. But then you say like, that is the amount of work that has to go into that, because you're now not talking just about your big why, right? But what's shared in terms of you and your spouse or your family or the people that came before you, right? So, before I ask you a little bit more, Matt, Kim, I just want to kick it to you, but what Matt just said there about that sort of like question of like what you value and thinking about that beforehand. I'm curious what your response is to that, because it's so interesting to think about. Legacy is something that happens after I'm gone, but where is your thinking at in terms of the idea of sort of leaving a legacy, if you will, before I go? That's that like sort of give with warm hand. I'm, and I know that's a little bit counterintuitive, but I'm curious if that's something that you've thought about, or if other researchers in the space have considered.
So the idea behind this intentional legacy reflection task that we've been using is to give people the space to think holistically about what they value
Hmm. Yeah.
and to, think about how they want to be remembered, what they want to leave behind, how they would like their actions, decisions, and behaviors to affect future generations in a lasting way. And it does have the effect of helping people think about their goals in more holistic ways and to figure out what's most meaningful to them. So it
Well, what does that
in the
look like? Can you
process,
tell me what that I'm sorry to cut you off, but what does that task look like? And I'm now curious because I think it'd be helpful to know. Can you give me an example of that?
yep, this is very specific, and almost exactly the way I articulated. We asked people to think about the impact they want to have on future generations and then to write about it for a few minutes, thinking about how they want to be remembered by future generations, what they would like to leave behind, and how they would like their actions, decisions, and behaviors to affect future generations in a lasting way. It's a simple task, but it consistently has the effect of helping people to be more other oriented, long term oriented, think about their goals more holistically, contemplate what makes their life meaningful, and to really expand their circle of concern for others to be more inclusive. What it doesn't do is it doesn't tell them what they value. It doesn't nudge them towards more collectivistic, or what we call collectivistic versus relational type intergenerational allocations. It just gives them the space to figure it out for themselves. So if we would help me to speak more concretely about the work we've done with the wealth management, I could speak a little bit about that.
Let me actually, I just want to, I do want to hear that. And I want to actually just figure out whether, Matt, that sounds like something you would ever put into practice or how you go about sort of sparking these conversations, right? Because where I sit, like I'm hearing that task that Kim's just brought up as a really solid task that I think research has shown that it's, actually creates more of these legacy motives. Is that something you see putting into practice, or are there ways that you would, go about that? Or, if I can be even more general about it, how do you have these conversations with your clients?
Well, let me say I'm in favor of almost anything that creates additional awareness around the subject. I think it's important.
Okay.
And I'll give you one quick story that shows you how important it is. I was on a flight coming home from Austin, Texas once, and I was tired and didn't really feel like talking with anyone. I put my headphones on and I looked out the window. And sure enough, as soon as I did, someone sat in the aisle seat, saw that I had a money related book in my hand and said, "Tell me what that book is about." I took my headphones off. I said, "Oh, you don't want to get me going on this book. This book is about what I do for work, and I'll get so excited about it. You'll be bored out of your mind." She said, "No, I wouldn't be bored at all. Money's been on my mind recently." I said, "Oh yeah, tell me why." She said, "My father passed away and he left me some money, but he put my sister in charge of it. And I had been engaging in some coaching at the time, and I knew my job at the moment was only to do one thing, but to ask, and how did that feel?" Which I asked. And then my new friend told me for about the 2-hour flight from Austin to St. Louis about how it felt and why it was tough for her. She had always been the wild child, and this decision made her feel like that narrative would continue on, that her dad never trusted her or believed in her or saw her clearly. So I listened and I listened and I listened. We were about to come in for the landing. I said, can I just offer an alternative perspective?" She said, "Yeah, sure." I said, what do you think about this notion? Is it possible that your dad loved you and understood you so much that this decision was to protect you? You just told me for 2 hours about your wild ways. Maybe he wanted to give this gift and show that he did understand you and wanted to show his love and protection so that the gift could last a long time. Is that possible?" And just throwing that question out changed the frame, changed our relationship. She's still a friend to this day, many years later, stood up on an airplane when it landed and hugged me and introduced me to a family member who was off the plane. But you think about that. the conversation never happened. Whatever it meant to her parent, it never happened. And so you're only left to guess. And so this is a long-winded way of saying I'm in favor of anything that creates awareness and then intention and conversation.
Yeah. No, I love that, because I think what I'm hearing there is, Kim, these research-backed tools that you're bringing up can be thought of as sort of a scaffold or a stepping stone to not just, what do I write down on paper, but then, like Matt's saying, like that conversation that I'm having with others in my family, intergenerationally, which seems to be so much of a part of it. That is really, I think that's a really great insight there. Kim, I'm curious what else, you had just mentioned a little while ago, you talked about the Andrew Carnegie effect. You talked about Andrew Carnegie. I know that you have a paper, I believe it came out last year in 2024, but I think it's actually set to be published, in 2025. So this is, hot off the presses. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that work on legacy motives, the Andrew Carnegie effect, and how you see that sort of intersecting here with some of the things that we're talking about?
So a few years ago, I was asked to teach a session to a group of wealth managers in an executive education class, and that prompted me to think about how our legacy research can be applied to the context of wealth management. When people make intergenerational wealth decisions, they need to make choices about how to allocate their resources among potential beneficiaries. So that got us thinking how reflecting on your legacy can influence the relative allocation of those resources among those beneficiaries. And what we found across multiple studies is that this intentional legacy reflection leads people to shift some of those resources from what we call relational beneficiaries, such as one's own children, to collectivistic ones. Um, but just in response to the story that Matt told, what's coming to my mind is that that first of all, there's more to your legacy than just the tangible resources. A important part of legacy are the intangible ones, the values, and what's more important sometimes than the resources themselves and the impact it has on the recipients and the beneficiaries is the meaning attached to those. And I could give you like a specific example. If you leave an inheritance for your children and you don't split it equally, and the children don't understand why, the only thing they're ever going to remember is that mom or dad loved this one more than that one. Whereas, mom and dad might have seen this one had greater needs, and maybe that was accurate, maybe it wasn't. But I do think it is important to recognize that is going to be meaning attached to those resources, and those resources do communicate values to the people who are left to observe those choices.
Yeah,
So,
and I think that's such a great point, Matt. I mean, how do you how do you go about doing this? How do you steer your clients toward those sorts of conversations? Not just the tangibility, but the meaning, the values. How do you steer them toward, I'm going to put quotes around it, optimal, more optimal decisions? I guess that's assuming that there is such a thing as an optimal, legacy decision, and that may be overly rational for something that might not always be. But I'm curious how you go about doing that, and if you face
I,
some common challenges. Sorry, yeah.
have you heard the like coaching with writing that, just get really comfortable starting with a really shitty first draft?
Yes,
That
yes.
Okay. I think that's the same. I'll just say for us, that's the same idea here. Your first draft, especially if you haven't been working on this since you were a young person, if you were coming to this later or somehow you're in a hurry later in life to figure these things out, I think the first thing is to not worry about it being perfect. You're sort of making it up. You likely didn't have much modeled for you. There hasn't been a ton of time or coaching spent around this topic. So just get really comfortable with draft one being lousy. And I would say that's sort of the opposite of like focusing on it, making it perfect or optimal. Let's just start with some ideas that you think reflect your real preferences about the meaning, purpose, and sort of values around what you will leave behind and how you might communicate those ideas. I can tell you that I have seen the first draft be pretty darn close to perfect, and I have seen the first draft be 180 degrees from where it ended up. But the idea, I think, is to start. My firm's motto is take the long view, which means to sort of back out and, think in a bigger, broader, longer perspective. But we also try to live in the here and now and get people to get started. So I really like this idea of anything that can help create the conversation. Oftentimes it is motivated by something big happening. I mean, how many times, think about in the business world, you see a business owner who's finally willing to sell his or her business when they're forced to. But if you have time and can be really thoughtful about it, you can consider who the ideal partner might be. And you're not in this tricky situation where you're in a rush.
Yeah.
So I love the idea of thinking about this when you have the freedom created by time and good health and hopefully abundance too.
I just want to say, I think this is so smart because I suspect, and this is just a speculation, that one of the many reasons why it may be hard to get into these conversations is the fear that I'm going to mess it up, or I'm not going to come up with, like you said, a good draft. I love that analogy because if you start by saying, this isn't going to be the best one, I'm just going to give it a shot and work with somebody to help me get it better. I think that opens up, that does, give some freedom to give it a try, and not just the sort of time freedom of starting early, but also the freedom to say, well, let's see where it goes here. And I think, if you combine that perspective with the reflection task that you're talking about, Kim, I think it, I really think that has the power to help people start having these conversations with themselves, like from what we on the research would call intrapersonal, within myself, and interpersonal, with other people side. Okay. Well, so listen, this is going to be sort of the wrap up here to really hammer home this idea, to bridge this divide. The whole point of this conversation is to say, what do academics know that people on the practice side don't? And what do people on the practice side do that academics aren't really studying or paying attention to? And so, Kim, let me start with you. Is there anything you want Matt, and not just Matt, but other advisors, other people who are like in the field, on the ground, working with people, to talk to them about their money and their financial decisions, anything you want them to know from the research side that they might not?
So I would say that in the work that I did with the wealth managers and the way they assessed their clients' priorities, they would have them go through different categories of ways to spend their money and kind of rank them from least important to most important, or some kind of scoring system. But what I didn't see as much was a way to kind of look at them all holistically in a way that just gave them the space to smoke out, like you can put them all as the most important, unless you force a choice between the two. But so what I like about the legacy reflection task is that it allows the people to kind of just the space to figure out in a holistic kind of way. And people don't think about their long-term goals naturally. You have to kind of get them thinking about it, but it gives them the space to kind of smoke out and think about, okay, what is most important to me? So people sit down, they write this legacy reflection task, and they're on the paper. And sometimes they're very surprised. It's not what, sometimes they talk about their children. Sometimes they talk about their work and the book they want to write. And they're a little surprised. They're like, oh, my kids didn't come into my mind first. So I think it gives them that opportunity to that space to just kind of figure out for themselves. And once again, I did want to emphasize that we don't, and the work doesn't nudge people to go one way or the other. It's just, it turns out that if you give people the space, most people end up finding it more meaningful to shift a little bit more, to be a little bit more inclusive, and who should be part of the beneficiaries of their legacy. So people are still leaving most of their money for their kids, but there's a little bit enough of a shift that it's significant, and a little bit of shifts to the collective, and that it makes a difference in the aggregate.
Okay. Kim, can we make that task available to people?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, we have been trying to. We really want to do a field experiment,
Yeah.
and we would love to work with any wealth management firm that would. It would be like free consulting. We are interested in collaborating.
Okay.
If
And
that's
and for
appropriate to say.
those of you listening, Matt just raised his hand. I think I heard two things there
Yep.
that this will be available and free consulting and no, but we'll make this available. I think that's great. This could be a really nice marriage here of sorts. And Matt, let me flip the question to you. Anything you want Kim and other researchers like myself to know from the practice side, or anything you'd like to see us study more?
Well, I'd love to see case studies
Mm.
on how this can go right or how it can go wrong. And I don't care. It doesn't have to be, classically, if you think of a case study, maybe you're thinking of like dynastic wealth from some family whose name we all would recognize. I have families who have insane wealth who don't feel like they have enough. And I have people with a couple $1 million who feel like they have it all. I'm less interested in the number and more interested in a case study of how this can be done well, or how it has been done with major implications that maybe were unexpected. I'd love to see case studies that we could evaluate. And I think what I really am interested in too is like the kinds of prompts that we can give clients or investors to help them broaden their consideration of what legacy means. Because I think if you just say, hey, what's legacy mean to you? That's hard. If you give them some prompts of what maybe some other people have already thought about, or a curriculum to work through, I think it could be hugely helpful. So it sounds like Kim's already done some of this good work, and I'm gonna learn more and be a participant in whatever program she makes available.
That's great. Hey, this has been a really rich and meaningful and fascinating conversation. I'm so appreciative to both of you for taking the time. Thanks again.